They show you just how incompetent these guys were. It is, you know, people say, it couldn't have been an inside job. These guys were too incompetent. Exactly. They were horribly incompetent. It's just the press has covered up their incompetence. But I digress. My next book, after this little book, is about World Trade Center 7, the NIST report about it. It'll be called The Mysterious Collapse of Building 7, why the final official 9/11 report is unscientific and false. And I show in the book that the NIST report about Building 7 confirms what the 9/11 movement has always said about Building 7. It's the Achilles heel, because their report makes clear that a defense of the official theory, a coherent, rational defense, is simply impossible. First of all, they had to commit various kinds of scientific fraud in order even to get their theory, get what looked like a plausible theory. Scientific fraud mainly has three major categories. There's fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. Now, plagiarism doesn't come into play here because I don't want to be unkind, but I think nobody had said anything stupid enough that these guys wanted to copy. So we're only talking about the fabrication and falsification, but there's one kind of falsification that is extremely important, that is ignoring relevant evidence. NIST had to ignore so much relevant evidence, such as an abundant amount of melted steel in the rubble of the World Trade Center. Now, maybe technically melted iron, which is a byproduct of thermite. But the point is that an enormous amount of steel had melted. Likewise, the World Trade Center dust reveals the existence of an enormous quantity of particles that could have been formed only at extremely high temperatures. We're talking about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. And fire, as you know, can, an open diffuse fire like this can at most get to 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, and the World Trade Center fires wouldn't have even been that hot. Even Thomas Eager of MIT says they were probably only 1,300 degrees, 1,400 at the most. So how did things that took 5,000 degrees to melt them, how did they show up in the World Trade Center dust? And as Alphonse mentioned earlier, the dust even includes active thermitic material that appears to be unreacted nanothermite. Now, as many of you know, nanoscience, nanotechnology is the rage now. If you want to get a new building, you apply for a nanoscience or nanotechnology building. There's a vast amount of money for this really popular development. With regard to thermite, thermite is an incendiary. It starts fires. But nanothermite is a high explosive. So it is enormously more powerful than ordinary thermite. And so unreacted thermite, nanothermite, appears to be in the World Trade Center dust. And this is, as Alphonse indicated, an extremely big story that is getting enormous amount of attention already in various parts of the world. Partly because the first author, the lead author, is Niels Harrit, a professor of chemistry at the University of Copenhagen, who is himself an expert in nanochemistry. When NIST was asked whether it had checked the dust for evidence of thermite, and here using thermite in the inclusive that would include nanothermite, it said no. When a reporter asked Michael Newman, a NIST spokesperson, Why not? He said, because there was no evidence of that. This circular answer asked the reporter to ask, but how can you know there's no evidence if you don't look for it first? Newman said, if you're looking for something that isn't there, you're wasting your time and the taxpayers' money. I'm not making this stuff up. NIST also ignored and distorted testimonial evidence that explosions had gone off in Building 7. Now, many of those reports came late in the day, just before the building came down. But in some respects, the most important testimony was given by Barry Jennings of the New York City Housing Authority. As soon as the North Tower was struck that morning at 8:46, Jennings rushed, as he was supposed to do, to the 23rd floor of Building 7, which was where Mayor Giuliani had his Office of Emergency Management. He was accompanied by Michael Hess, who was the corporation counsel of the City of New York, and therefore Giuliani's lead attorney. And when they got there at 9 o'clock, they found everybody was gone. They'd skedaddled very quickly, still smoking coffee cups on the desk. So they phoned up, said, what should we do? They were told, you get out of there immediately. So they tried to go down the elevator wouldn't work. They started running down the stairs. But when they got down to the 6th floor, Jennings said there was a huge explosion that knocked the landing out from under us. We're just barely able to hold on. We pulled ourselves up. We went back up to the 8th floor. We broke the window, signaled for help. When I looked out the window, I saw the North Tower, the South Tower, both towers still standing. However, when Giuliani wrote a book about the next year and included a section about his friend Michael Hess's 9/11 experience, he said that what these men thought was an explosion was really just debris from the collapse of the North Tower. Now, that occurred at 10:28. What they were talking about occurred evidently by about 9:15. So we're talking about a difference of an hour and a quarter. How could that possibly be the same event? Nevertheless, this became the official story. It was defended by NIST in its 2005 report and again in its World Trade Center 7 report, and then supported by BBC Special in 2008. Jennings had told his story to the loose change producers. It was supposed to go in, loose change final cut. But Jennings said, please don't put it in. It'll cost me my job. They left it out. But then a few months later, Jennings gave an interview to the BBC. But the BBC then distorted his testimony and made it appear like what he was talking about was much later. And so the all-knowing narrator could say what they thought was an explosion was just debris from a falling skyscraper. The BBC even made it seem like Jennings was all by himself, even though he kept saying, we went down the stairs and then we ran back up. They kept saying, Jennings, Jennings, as if he was all alone. This BBC show aired in July 2008. NIST, whose timeline the BBC had followed, released the first draft of its report the next month, in August. Shortly before this release, evidently only 2 days from what people have been able to figure out, Barry Jennings, who was 53 years old, died mysteriously. It has been impossible to get any information about it other than the statement that he died in a hospital. Whatever the cause of his death, it was certainly convenient. He was not around to be interviewed again, perhaps by loose change. And the BBC was able to put out a new version of its special on Building 7. And this time, Michael Hess participated and confirmed the truth of the BBC timeline, saying, oh yeah, this was just debris from the North Tower collapse. Michael Hess had in the meantime become a partner in Giuliani's business.